Today I'm talking to Phillip de Wet, my former Mail and Guardian colleague and now kind of international writer at large, who has written a book called Write Risky: How to Write for Impact in the Age of AI. Now you can get hold of the book, learn more about Phillip, and in fact you can get the Phillip de Wet action doll, sorry that's a joke, at phillipdewet.net. That's Phillip with two L's, phillipdewet.net.
I don't think I've seen you in the flesh for I don't know how long, but
Yeah.
I mean, I remember you standing at the Mail and Guardian, writing standing up. In your book, you touch on some of the interesting ways to sort of do your writing. I remember you writing standing up. So what's happened to you between then and now you've got a book out?
We got to know each other at the Mail and Guardian. That was in a tough situation, but not as tough as it was now, right? So functioning newsroom, a newspaper coming out every week, and we were doing some good work there, I think. It wasn't a rock solid institution, but I left it on a relatively high note there to join Business Insider South Africa, which was then a startup under the News 24 brand. So not a pure startup. There was money and organization in that. So I went from investigative, very serious highbrow paper, which was boring the hell out of me at that point, to this very popular Business Insider South Africa. Yes, it was a business publication, but it had a popular mandate. It was kind of the popular brand within News 24, right? And that was an interesting transition in and of itself. During my time there, I followed my wife to the United Kingdom, where I now spend most of my time. Business Insider came to an end, quite literally. The mothership in the US yanked the license because they no longer wanted different English language publications. So long story short, I found myself hustling in the UK and doing freelance work and doing consulting and having a bit of extra time. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't have a day job that needed me, every hour that I was
Right.
awake. I started looking back through some notes I'd been making for the better part of kind of 16 years, and always thought I should turn into a book. And this was style guides that I wrote at magazines, at Maverick Magazine, even a little bit at, you may still remember This Day. I was with the ill-fated This Day newspaper for a year.
Yeah.
So some of the notes come from that. A lot of it came from Maverick Magazine, where we were trying to build a new voice, a new kind of approach to a business publication, and that needed a unified voice. Some of it came from the Mail and Guardian, and yes, including stuff like using standing desks to get a bit of emotion into writing, and to get the blood pumping and to get stuff happening fast. A lot of it came from what we learned at Business Insider. So learning from the US guys who popularized this approach of the 3 bullet points, and coming in very conversationally, using as told to mechanisms, for instance, to kind of like write first person narratives. And I had all of this material. I finally had a little bit of time. I put it together into a book format, and I thought, yeah, I can sell this on the open market. Turns out not that easy. Turns out the book publishing business is not what it used to be. But at the same time, the technology is there to do it yourself. The platforms are there to do it yourself. So it
Yeah.
kind of technically lives as an ebook, but because I can pay Amazon money, they will send it to me in paperback format.
Ah,
And
right.
there's finally something tangible that I can tell people I have written, even if not that many of them are necessarily buying it.
Right. Be really good to have a book in paper copy here in South Africa, where you doubtless have many fans.
It's pretty hard, as it turns out. So Amazon has now integrated, well, for some time, they've got their Kindle system integrated with their print
Yeah.
on demand system, which means
Yeah.
in hubs in the UK and in the US. I've sent this book to people in the US you may know, people like Nick Dawes and Tanya Pampaloni. You can have a book printed in the US or the UK and in a couple of other markets and have it delivered via the Amazon infrastructure. It costs effectively nothing because Amazon has fulfillment sorted. They do this, they turn it around in less than 2 days in terms of their printing, because that's just the scale and the speed at which they work. But they don't have a printing hub in South Africa. So if you want to book in South Africa,
Damn.
you can get Amazon to print it for you, but then you have to send it. sending stuff from anywhere to South Africa is rather a big deal. It costs more
It's a
than printing
nightmare.
the actual book.
Yeah.
The costs on a per book basis is kind of outrageous. So that's not a problem that we've cracked yet in South Africa. There are other print on demand solutions. There are ways to do it, but none of them are quite as easy.
Look, you've done the book. I mean, there it is. It's great fun to read, because you're writing primarily for journalists. Am I right? This kind of book.
Ideally not even. A lot of the frustration came from seeing very poor business writing. People, and by business writing, I don't mean annual reports. I don't mean, things for publication. I mean internal emails. We
Right.
increasingly have a realization, especially in larger corporate organizations. If you're in an organization of 1,000 people or more, you realize that you need to write for impact. When you write an email, it's not necessarily going to get read. When you write a Slack message, it's not necessarily going to get read, and it's not going to necessarily land. And people in business are starting to realize, hang on, we need to pay attention to what we write. Some of them are outsourcing it to AI, and the results are, predictably awful. Some of them are starting to give thought and attention to what they write and how they write. And I ideally want to reach some of those people and just kind of like shake them awake and go, you can do this. You can write like a journalist. You can write for impact, and you can kind of convey your ideas if you just pay a little bit of attention.
A lot of what you're talking about is sort of descriptive, finding ways to describe things, finding ways to, also to make the language as vivid as possible.
Mm, The trick is in the name. And this is the problem with writing a 225 page book. Um, those business language users really just need to think in terms of risk, which they're good at. If you're communicating professionally in business, then you're doing some kind of risk calculation somewhere in your job already. They don't do that
Right.
in language. In language, they go, it must be safe. It must never get me into trouble. The thinking is complete risk aversion, and then nothing you write will ever land. It's impossible. So if they just take that name and they just go, hang on, this is a risk adjusted environment. I have to take certain risks, and I can, kind of like quantify my level of comfort with risk and then write accordingly. That's it. They will be better for that, and that's my job done. The world is a better place. Should they then kind of like casually page through the book and pick up a couple of tips or tricks in terms of how to do that, maybe literally scan through the chapter headings and find something that resonates with them, then I've given them that kind of like added value which justifies the price of the book. But if they look at the cover and they go, hang on, writing is an inherently risky enterprise. I understand risk. I'm going to take certain risks because the risk of not getting read is the greatest risk of all. You've got to cross that curiosity threshold.
Yeah.
They will see a great deal of benefit immediately.
Right. And I like the idea very much of, uh, write risky, as you call the book, or to take those risks. I mean, I didn't think of it really in the context of, a business writer who might be writing about some new company and saying, well, the IPO is so much, the risk is this much, is going to, that the concept of risk that is embedded in the mind of a business writer might be a bit different to the concept of risk in someone else's mind. But the idea of risk, I think, is, and writing as a risky enterprise, I think is a good idea. Partly because, as you say, people are writing. I mean, they try and write in a conventional way. They're trying to achieve a certain level of, of conventionality. I mean, in many cases, I think people who are relatively new to writing or not great readers, because I think what turns people into writers is really a lot of reading, but that they kind of, they're aiming to basically reproduce familiar cliches, because to them that is what they read in whatever publications. That's what they're aiming for. So I like the idea of, say, if you're writing, whatever you're writing, if it's an email, there's an element of risk involved. Um, and you should be willing to take that risk, take the jump, leap. Um, but I also like the idea that on a sort of maybe on a deeper psychological level, um, the sort of getting yourself to write something, getting yourself to sort of face that blank page or that empty screen and put your fingers on the keyboards and now think of something. Um, that if you understand that it's not necessarily going to be um, a peaceful, relaxing activity. That there's some risk involved. There's also some emotional risk involved that you're gonna have to manage that for yourself and say, listen, I'm taking some chances here. It's natural that I'm going to be like a little bit scared of something in this process because I don't know where it's going to come out. I don't know how it's going to land. I've got all the complicated things to work with. So I like that idea of like that you sit down when you sit down to write psychologically, you're already preparing yourself in a way for taking a bit of a leap, taking some chances.
I think we've been forced into it in journalism because of the dire straits that we're in sometimes, and
Mm,
because of this whole attention economy in which it used to be that there was an information scarcity. So whatever we put out, would find an audience, and it was all fine. And suddenly we needed to start competing on the level of headlines on the internet, and we needed to start thinking about those headlines landing, and we needed to start thinking about the risks that we're taking in terms of getting sued, pissing people off, creating
right.
misimpressions in terms of that headline. And
Well,
journalists
nowadays, getting
today,
murdered too.
and getting murdered. I mean, we've been making life or death decisions in terms of source protection, since prehistoric times. So risk adjusting your workflow and your job and your writing as a journalist is just a natural thing in every space that you're in now, whether you're on social media or on your company message board or in a superior or even, your inferior's email boxes. So a boss sending an email to a group of subordinates cannot guarantee that that will be read. They cannot guarantee that will be read, even if they have a compliance mechanism that says, check this
Mm,
box if you have read it, because people
mm,
will skim past it and pretend to have read it. If you have a message that really needs to land, you need to take extraordinary action in order to make sure it lands. And we've been doing this for a long time with, in various different ways, and we have all of these tips and tricks, never mind what else is out there in the world. So my dirty secret that I disclose in the book is that I'm not a natural writer. I've never found it easy to write. I have to work at it. I have to find ways to make my writing land. So I've been stealing from American interrogation manuals and railway safety manuals and watching how the Russians do their propaganda. I've been trying to find, grasping for straws anywhere I can in terms of actually making my writing land. And there's so much good thinking in the world about this. So again, once you've decided to take some risks and once you've kind of like risk adjusted your writing, the next part is not easy, but it's not impossible either. You can go and find the mechanisms. You can build your own arsenal of tips or tricks. You can do more dangerous stuff or you can do less dangerous stuff. You just need to realize that you can take risks and then care and put some time into it, and then the magic happens.
right. And I mean,
You
here we
all
sit with these LLMs that I mean may not be perfect or maybe talking rubbish and so forth, but I mean they're churning out a vast amount of writing or a simulacrum of writing. Uh, what are you going to say to someone who says, well, why do I need to learn all these tricks for writing? Why do I need to all these things that are going to make it so vivid and exciting when I can just ask ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or one of them to just do it for me?
I am a very enthusiastic AI user. I'm a techno-utopian. I love my LLMs. I've got a whole fleet of them involved in my writing at all times. So take this whence it comes. I have no problem with AI. And oh my God, it is boring. It is a terrible writer. Every LLM, the most advanced LLMs at the moment, are boring. And people can tell.
Some people can tell,
Some
if
some
something's
people,
written by AI.
well, People on average can tell. So what we're seeing increasingly, and we're starting to see the good academic research come through on this, if you have a piece of AI writing and a related kind of like similar length, similar subject piece of human writing, even if the human writing is bad, people will respond more positively to it. So if it's a headline, more people will click through to the headline. If it's a summary, more people will read to the end of the summary. If it's a descriptive passage, then people will have better recall having read the human version than having read the AI version. So what we're finding is that human communication is just superior. I think in part because we do it all the time, and because it's, you know, it's a survival thing. You learn to talk because you have to survive, and you learn to communicate with other people because we are social animals. So there are many instinctive things that we do in communication that our machines can't yet reproduce. Those machines are getting better at it all of the time, and they're getting better at mimicking our styles. And if you spend a lot of time and effort at it, then you can prompt engineer something which starts to look like fairly decent writing. It is still much easier to just do it yourself and to just write
Yeah.
it yourself, and use AI as a helper rather than as a initial starting point. It's also the easiest way to get really excellent writing is to write a draft yourself. Maybe it's poorly structured, maybe it's poorly worded, and then bring in the LLMs as helpers and to get it done. Also, you know, LLMs are built with guardrails in place, so they are inherently risk averse. They must be commercially, and in terms of the ethics and the morality of these machines, they must be risk averse in the first place. They are going to write risk averse copy regardless of what you get into them. So if you as a human come and you take a risk adjusted stance and you write something which is slightly more risky, you will always outcompete the AIs. And again, you know, it's all there in the title. If you take risks, you can outcompete the machines at their own game. I mean, this is a controversial statement to be making in
Yeah.
the AI space. Keep in mind, I'm also formally studying artificial intelligence in the background at the same time. So I'm sitting in
Right.
rooms where people are talking about the new statistical models and the new approaches to this stuff. And it is make no mistake, the sophistication is growing, and the ability to mimic human writing is absolutely evolving quite quickly. It's just that it is going to be. I mean, the problems include that LLM writing is kind of stuck in time. It can only depend on the training data. So it's always going to sound like a certain kind of epoch of writing, as opposed to the zeitgeist that keeps evolving. So unless you have rapidly evolving LLMs, and if you have rapidly retrained LLMs, you're going to have stuff that's not quite in keeping. Maybe it tries to mimic, you know, the memes of the moment and kind of like the sound on the ear of the language at the moment, but it's never quite going to be there unless you have really, really good training data from, say, your company, and you've got a corpus of writing from your company. It's not going to have the voice that is familiar to your colleagues. Each company has its own dialect, and it uses, you know, certain phrases that it avoids others. So you've got that problem. And again, these are all things that you can overcome if you have infinite time and infinite money and infinite computing, none of which we have. Whereas anyone can learn to, especially with LLMs, anyone can learn to write pretty well if they just spend a little bit of time and attention at the craft.
Yeah.
Committing anything to the page is a extremely dangerous thing to do because it'll outlast you, because people will give it a contrary reading, because you're not in the room to correct their misreading as it goes on. So it is the riskiest form of communication known to man. It does come back to haunt you, and we've seen this. People growing up today have seen this practically with, you know, kind of like the shunning of people for 10 or 20-year-old social media posts. Something that you write today can be a landmine that you plant that explodes in your future face. So I think we instinctively understand that writing is that dangerous. If you don't do it all the time and you haven't developed these muscles, then yes, that paralysis, that is the sane response. That's the natural thing, that you should be afraid of it. People fear the blank page, I think, in part because they understand the consequences of once you've written the first word, you know, as it was Bilbo Baggins who said, once you set foot on the path, you don't know where it takes you. That can take you into a very dangerous place indeed. If you have an LLM at one of 2 points or both, either to start off with. I use LLMs quite a lot to work out entire outlines sometimes, but at least, start with an idea and interrogate that idea conversationally until I have something which is either a starting point for my thinking or a completed outline that I can write to. And then on the far side of that production process, having an LLM that you can put something to and go, give me a hard time about this. Give me the contrary reading. Can it be misunderstood? Many times it's going to miss things and it's going to hallucinate and it has many problems, but it gives me that confidence. I have a second pair of eyes on it. It brings us much closer to the situation that you and I found ourselves at in newspapers, where you had multiple readers, where you had a production process which had a safety net built into it, which people don't have or never could have. When you were writing a quick email, to the rest of the company, you couldn't bring in a proofreader. You didn't have the time and the money to have a second pair of eyes on it. And unless you were in a very privileged position, you had to take the chance. Now, at least you've got something. You've got something that can help you go, hang on a minute, this is a logical leap that doesn't make sense. Or you've completely, this analogy falls flat. And I think that safety net, absolutely, people can outsource their cognitive processes entirely to LLMs and they can just kind of like give up. Those people won't get far. Kind of business evolution will take them out of the system. But people who use it as a way to get over the fear, get over the hump, and actually get into writing, I think for them it can be the best assistive device since spectacles were invented.
Right.
I mean, I have my own peculiarities in terms of my workflow, so this doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but I like using Google's Gemini as a fact checker. So it's a great fact checking engine, and properly prompted and properly harnessed, it can be a great fact checker. That's something that I separate from every other process. I quite like ChatGPT, especially the latest pro models are very good in terms of language helpers. So I treat that more as a proofreader. So I'll go through a fact checking phase on Gemini, and then I'll go through a language checking phase on GPT. Similarly, you can use the Anthropic models to interrogate concepts a little bit more broadly, and then you can go back to Gemini if you need to find additional factual basis. So often I will have a piece of writing and I need to go and find academic references which can broaden my thinking in terms of that. That's a step that each of those machines can play the role of a copy desk editor, a sub editor, a proofreader, a research assistant. And you can take that approach and create for yourself an ecosystem which can achieve what you can't on your own. And you're no longer on your own. You're no longer facing a blank page all by yourself. You kind of like have a team behind you at effectively zero cost, available at your beck and call. Personally, I find that enormously freeing. So if the writer cares, it will show. It'll show in the output and it'll show in the reception. If the reader cares, they will pick up on it because you can see care and attention and passion. You can sense it. It's behind those words. There's intentionality, there's kind of like there's craft involved in it. And there will always be writers who don't care. And sometimes that's fine. It's just a workaday piece of whatever documentation. And there'll always be readers who don't care because whatever, they can outsource it to a machine which summarizes it for them or which tells them for what action to take. So, maybe for the vast majority of your writing, it doesn't matter. You don't have to care and the reader won't care. But sometimes you do. Sometimes it does matter. Sometimes it has to land. Sometimes you need action to follow on writing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to make an impression. And there, the machine human unit is perhaps the best way to look at it. That output, if you leave that output purely to the machine side, yeah, it'll show.
Thanks, Phil.
Later.
Thank you